Interestingly, this game plays straight into fulfilling the conditions of Chrollo's ability. So it's actually pretty scary how perfectly Morena's card game would function with Chrollo's Skill Hunter. If Morena sat Chrollo down for a negotiation game, then she would automatically be fulfilling 3 of the 4 requirements of Skill Hunter. Firstly, because Chrollo is experiencing the ability firsthand, so that's a nice tick. But secondly, one of the core mechanics of the card game is Morena explaining her power, so that can be framed as answering a question about Nen because Chrollo can ask whatever he wants. And the time constraints of the negotiation game mean that it's within everyone's best interest to conclude this encounter well within the 1-hour time limit of Skill Hunter. The only issue after that is making Morena touch the cover of the book, and also then choosing the right answer to weasel his way out of Morena's request. But if Chrollo did take control of his ability, then the negotiation game is extremely powerful because Chrollo's request could be touch the cover of this book, and he could ensnare people into the Skill Hunter ability much more easily. And just imagine if this was the ability that Chrollo was looking for to deal with Hisoka. To make a request that Hisoka give Bungee Gum to him, or to just make Hisoka off himself and never come back. And so the entire second round of Chrollo versus Hisoka boils down to playing a card game instead of actually fighting. Here's the thing, it sounds ridiculous, but I wouldn't put it past Togashi. Do you think Morena's request can influence the type of Nen ability that the person develops? Like for Dogman, maybe her request was, become my Nen sniffing dog. I think that you could definitely be onto something here. If the request was just as simple as, hey, want to join my family? That's incredibly vague, and Morena has a very specific plan, and she knows exactly what she needs to accomplish it. And so Morena could end up giving Boxen a request that goes on to match the ability she develops via contagion, because Nen responds to need and desire. So if a person's need or desire is to become a specific tool for Morena, then surely it is possible. It's also another one of those things that just makes the Haoli family that much more dangerous. The fact that it's not just a random assortment of Nen abilities, and it is in fact an intricately planned combination of 23 abilities. I mean, just think about what Chrollo was able to achieve against Hisoka, cycling through 6 abilities, then quadruple that, and you potentially have Morena's plan with the Haoli. I don't think the card game is a Nen ability. I think it's just a tool to help get Morena's charismatic coerciveness across without the need for forceful intimidation, which is easy given she tends to deal with non-Nen users that may or may not be aware of abilities. Alright, so I have gone ahead and assumed that this card game is a Nen ability, mostly because it has all the classic language of a Hatsu. The game has its own set of conditions that bind Boxen to whatever response she ends up with. It also incurs punishment for both factions depending on how long the game lasts, and it even has the opening condition of Boxen losing the ability to choose anything but yes or no if she decides not to play the game. So I think that Occam's razor says that we have to assume this is an Nen ability until proven otherwise. I mean, maybe it is the bluff of the century. Assuming it is though, you'd need to wonder how effective such a bluff would be on a non-Nen user. For someone completely unfamiliar with this world, would they feel that same reverence or compliance? Or would they just say, whatever, I don't have time for your stupid card games? Because a veteran Nen user in a situation like this immediately understands what could be at stake, but a regular person who only heard the word Nen a couple of days ago might not be so easy to convince. However, I do quite like the idea that this is a facade, and that Morena will actually convince Boxen to join her cause without the use of Nen. So that is an interesting idea to have out there. On a similar note though, I've seen a lot of people surprised by just how smart Boxen is. And in fact, one of the best comments I saw about this chapter was that it was completely unrealistic because nobody has ever understood the rules of a card game upon first explanation. And you know what? Fair. Think about what Kenny Wang said. Time to use your Joker. Maybe it was because of the game. I mean, that's the obvious conclusion. There's a Joker in the card game, and Kenny Wang just mentioned the idea of a Joker. It's very hard to ignore, but is it, I don't know, is it too obvious? Because logistically, it doesn't even really make sense. Within the rules of the card game, Morena can't even use the Joker. That's entirely up to chance or Boxen's choice. And Kenny Wang was referring to the idea of the Phantom Troop attacking the Haoli base before they were ready. So with that in mind, I have to think that the Joker was referring to something else. I do, however, think that Kenny Wang was very potentially recruited through this game, and very recently at that. For whatever reason, I thought that more Haoli members had died by now, but as it turns out, it's only 2. One was Luini, who was killed by Nobunaga, and the other was Padilla, I don't know his name, who got killed by Henry and his pigeons. So if Contagion does allow Morena to re-up her numbers, then we currently have 2 slots open. One of them may very well have been taken by Kenny Wang, and we're very potentially seeing the other one filled as we speak. I feel like I'm part of the Haoli family. I want Morena to succeed. I feel like you just want to get kissed by Mirenna, because I have seen a recent flood of, how shall we say, Mirenna appreciation of late. In all seriousness though, I have a very similar feeling, and I think it's because whether Togashi intended to do this or not, I think that he did. What he's done is he's made the Heoli family the underdogs of this arc. You've got this group of absolute nen amateurs going up against veteran mafia families, the overall abilities of the succession contest, the Phantom Troop, the Zodiacs, the Zoldycks are on board, and endless individuals who outclass them. And so there is that genuine desire to see them succeed against all odds, especially because what they're fighting against is a fairly despicable Kakin monarchy, as well as the general evils of the world, which we all agree are not good. That's why we call them evils. There are some absolutely horrid people in charge of this nation and this planet, and it would be very satisfying to see many of them fall. If I'm being completely honest, I do think that Togashi may be writing a lot of himself into the Heoli family, perhaps as a bit of a power fantasy, and as a way of exploring some of his ideas in a socially acceptable way. I bring this up from time to time, but Togashi is a notorious nihilist. He is very clearly unimpressed by humanity as a whole, and this isn't even the first time that he's experimented with wiping them all out. But if you express those views in something like a Reddit post, then you'll probably be put on a watch list. However, if you express those views in the form of conjuring a fictional story, then you will be lauded as a literary genius. And again, this isn't even the first time that Togashi has declared intellectual war on the concept of humanity, because the Chimera Ant arc represented another apocalyptic threat, but one that seriously makes you ask whether or not the world would have been a better place if the Ant King Meruem had won. And you can also tell that the Heoli plotline is where a lot of Togashi's passion is going, because he's even gone so far as to create his own in-world RPG system for them to play. So he's been thinking a lot about them and investing a lot of time into this family. And I do wonder if Togashi sees himself as a Mirenna type figure or someone who would follow Mirenna to this conclusion, especially considering that as part of this campaign to annihilate humanity, it is mandatory to kiss a pretty woman, which is a very sort of self-insert thing to do. And I get that all of this sounds extremely dark, but I really cannot undersell just how much Togashi despises the human race as a whole. And I'm convinced that most of the optimism in Hunter x Hunter is a result of two factors. One being that the best way to portray despair is by offering a tiny sliver of hope to give you a bit of a promise of what could be and then take it away, which is a principle that can be applied to most things. For example, when I was a lighting designer, I discovered that the best way to make a stage feel cold was to focus on a tiny bit of warmth. To add that one tiny bit, maybe it's a small fire in a blizzard or something, but that minuscule piece of warmth is what emphasizes just how cold the rest of the space is. And if you don't have that warmth, then there's no comparison, there's no tangible reference for how cold the rest of the space is. And the second reason why there's any optimism remaining in Hunter x Hunter at all is because Togashi often holds himself back and doesn't want to disappoint the readers. He generally wants to meet them halfway and very rarely executes the kind of story that he really wants to. And I think there's a good argument to be made that if Togashi did not feel that obligation to the readers, then Gon may very well have actually died during the Chimera Ant arc. I don't think that Meruem would have won because that was potentially a good outcome. Togashi made him too good, and humanity would never allow such goodness to exist. But to bring this all back around, I think that we could be heading to a similar outcome with the Heoli. It seems difficult to think about right now because they've killed literally hundreds of people in their murder farms to level up, which is, it's not the gold standard of humanity by any means. It's not what we aspire to be. But that's also exactly how the ants started out. They farmed humans as well in order to feed the queen and make their colony stronger. And with that in mind, I'm going to reserve judgment on the Heoli family members until the conclusion of the succession contest arc, because I think that we could be heading for a strangely sympathetic twist with them. I like that no I didn't versus yes I didn't insight. Alright, this could be very important because many cultures can be a bit confusing with seemingly straightforward words. And one culture that does this is good old Australia. As an Australian, we do have our own very annoying nuances that often confuse tourists. For example, if you're asking an Australian a yes or no question, it is entirely possible that you'll get one of two responses. Yeah, nah, or nah, yeah, which I imagine must be absolutely infuriating to anyone learning English as a second language. But the key thing to remember is that the second word is always the actual answer. So if I ask someone, did you like the movie? And they reply with, yeah, nah, then that means no, they didn't like the movie. And there's a lot of reasons why you'd respond in this way, one of which might just be cultural habit, but another is that saying the yeah first is a way of softening that opinion. because the responder doesn't know what the questioner thinks about the movie, and they don't want to come out of the gate with a very strong no. So it's more of a yeah, nah. How does Hunter x Hunter have its own in-world language everyone uses, but the cards also just say yes and no in English? Okay, good question. It's because the Hunter x Hunter language, which I believe is known as Hunterese, is a substitution for Japanese. It is the main language spoken in the Hunter x Hunter world. However, just like Japanese, English is commonly incorporated into it. One of the best moments to see this in action was when Gon and Killua discovered a message left for them in Dolai City, which started in English and then became Hunterese. Although where things get real confusing is that when you think about the fact that the Hunter x Hunter language is a substitute for Japanese, but also real Japanese exists in the Hunter x Hunter world. Hanzo's business card was in Japanese, Basho writes his great haikus in Japanese, and the Kakin Empire itself speaks a language that is neither Hunterese, Japanese, or English, as we see in chapter 187, because people often forget this, but Gon and Killua were actually teleported to the Kakin Empire by a company after Greed Island because that's where Kite was at the time. Kite was working for the Kakin government to conduct research on new species. So this nation has been with us for quite some time. Just a reminder that we have one more chapter before Togashi goes back into hibernation. So that's what we thought for quite a while, because on Twitter, Togashi had only confirmed that up to chapter 408 had been completed. But very recently, Togashi has posted the finished manuscripts for chapter 409 and 410, which is very, very exciting because we're getting to at least chapter 410 in this batch. And my feeling is that after 410, we'll be taking a break. At this stage, I guess there is still the potential to plow on to 411, in which case we would be in completely uncharted territory. It's entirely possible that it could happen because Togashi is already finished with his first draft of chapter 424, so we could be in a situation where everything up to that just needs to be properly finalized, and we might not be taking a break until 420 or even beyond. I definitely don't want to place all my hopes on that. I think definitely expect a break after 410, but in a fantasy world, Togashi could be aiming to get all the way up to chapter 430 in a single run. I don't think it'll happen, but that may have been the goal. And right now, I just want to say that the world feels like we flipped completely upside down because we have One Piece author Eiichiro Oda, the most consistent man in manga for the last 3 decades, taking an emergency break for health reasons, and Yoshihiro Togashi, the most consistent man in health breaks, powering through and relentlessly delivering on a weekly basis. And for the last few years now, we've known that Togashi has had the outlines for Hunter x Hunter all the way up to chapter 430, and due to that stated number, it's often been predicted that 430 will be the end of the Succession contest, which at one point I thought might be the case, but with chapters like 407, where we're sitting down to play an intense card game, it feels very ambitious to me that we'd be able to wrap up everything he set up in 23 more chapters. So look, I don't know where we're going from here. What's happening is that we're hitting at least chapter 410 this year, and beyond that, I find it hard to believe that we wouldn't have another batch of 10 next year. And just as a last minute update on this, Togashi has just posted that the dialogue is now complete for chapter 411. I don't know if it'll be ready by the time we hit 410, but break or no, now is absolutely one of the greatest times in history to be a Hunter x Hunter fan.